We continue to lose the fundamental unfairness of the American economy. It should make all of us angry. Anybody who isn't angry should be scared, because anyone who isn't angry is in the top 1/10 of 1%. And history is not on their side. Don't believe me? Just ask the rich French and Russians. Right now in America is how their revolutions started. France in the late 1700s, Russia in the early 1900s. It did not end well for the rich. People think the economy is unfair, and they're right. Telling them tariffs are going to fix the problem won't work. People think the economy is getting worse. Telling them to be patient doesn't cut it. Just one of the alarm bells right now. 42% of young Americans under the age of 30 feel they are struggling to get by financially. All while the Wall Street Journal reports new data suggests $1 trillion of wealth was created for the 19 richest American households alone in 2024. So never before has the disconnect between the very rich and everybody else been so large. Maybe during the Gilded Age. That didn't end well for the rich either. But folks in Washington right now don't feel this disconnect. Life here's pretty good. Big corporations still crush earnings estimates. The lobbyists still spend big money whining and dining members of Congress. Nowhere in the world could people move from the broom closet to the upper middle class in one generation. It's why people came to America. It's why my ancestors, my grandparents, my great-grandparents came. It's the promise of the American dream, the dream that binds us all together. The dream is what we all believe in until we don't. So a lot of Americans don't feel America's fair anymore. It's about class now. And history tells us when a country divides on class, things do not end well. With us now, political commentator, historian Douglas Murray, author of On Democracies and Death Cults, Israel and the Future of Civilization. I would say one of the most important books of this decade to be written. Mr. Murray, good to see you, sir. Thank you. Is America becoming too much like Europe?
Yes, in some ways, but it has been for a while. The polls you just cited about young people's estimate of the likelihood they've got to succeed are polls I think we should be concerned about, because they do speak to a truth that a lot of us notice. And there's a couple of things in there. The first thing is, of course, is the expectation that young Americans are going to have to grow up into debt of some kind. Particularly the more and more young Americans that are pushed towards college degrees, sometimes ones that are frankly a kind of Ponzi scheme, but they begin their working life heavily in debt, and it's a debt that they're going to take years to pay off. So that's one part of it. The bigger one that affects everyone, particularly those people in that 18 to 30 generation, of course, is the difficulty of accumulating capital in order to get onto, most importantly, the housing ladder. That's something we've seen in Europe for sure. In my own country of birth, in Great Britain, in recent decades, this has started to tear apart the social fabric of the country, because there's no reason why a young person who can't collect and accumulate capital is inevitably going to become a capitalist. They have to see the rungs that they can get onto in the ladder in society, and frankly, see that their hard work, if they carry out hard work, will in fact be rewarded.
You take away that promise of reward and people go looking for other things. I think it's no surprise that Bernie and AOC are getting such huge crowds. And it's an economic populist message. It's different than Donald Trump's. The progressive movement in America has closely aligned themselves with the pro-Palestinian movement, really hand in glove with them. How is this what you connect, and I think rightly, of sort of the lack of faith in the system of young Americans with somehow being in love with Hamas?
Well, it's a slightly complex psychological process, but I'd say it is. There are a couple of things that drive that. Many of the polls, a lot of the polls show that young Americans feel more negatively towards Israel than any other generation, and more positively towards the cause of Hamas than any other group in America. And there are lots of reasons for that. One is, of course, the fact that a lot of foreign money, particularly from Qatar, has been pumped into the US in recent years to educational institutions and others. When we see people chanting for intifada, which is, you know, that people pretend that it means some kind of it's just resistance. No, an intifada, as you and I know, is terrorism, is the carrying out of terrorist acts in order to kill people. It's an uprising of terror. But when we hear people calling for that in, you know, the campuses like Columbia or Princeton or Harvard, you know, that is not a generic movement. But there are some people who have joined it because they think, effectively, it's the social justice movement of their era. And it's one of the examples of what goes wrong, I would say, when other things in the society start to go wrong, not least the opportunities for economic improvement. People start to sign up to utopian visions and utopian dreams. After the 2008 financial crash, we saw people saying things like, you know, should we return to Marx? Should we look and see if Karl Marx actually got it right? Occupy Wall Street. In the current decade, it seems that a large-ish number of young people, primarily at the most privileged institutions, have decided to throw their lot in effectively with Hamas. And this is an extraordinary development in some ways. But if you look at what they think they're in favor of, they seem to think that this terrorist organization, what I describe on Democracies and Death Cults as the epitome of a death cult, literally a group that worships death, that seeks death, that glorifies death, and not only wants to bring death to its enemies, but glories in it when it brings it to its own people. When they join a group like that, they seem to think at the moment, and I document these examples in my book, they seem to think they're joining some kind of social justice movement, as if sort of Hamas is the sort of forward armed wing of the sort of trans movement or the LGBTQIA plus movement or the green movement or something like that. And that's just flat out wrong and is, of course, an unbelievable demonstration of ignorance, but it's an ignorance that they're taught. And it's particularly taught, I give the example of students who are speaking at Columbia University. It's taught by people who are told the best thing you can do with your life, even if you're at a privileged American university, is to campaign and rebel, to become an activist. There's a student I quote in the book who says at one point, he says, when I joined up at Columbia, I was the first generation of my family to come here. I was taught about the rich history of protest at Columbia, and I thought to myself, when things kick off again, I want to be at the center of it. And people like that were at the center of the climate crisis thing for a bit. And then, after October the 7th, they were led to believe that if they sided with a death cult against a democracy, they were somehow on the right side of history and indeed at the forefront of a historical movement.
Briefly, before we get a little bit more on this, but the intifada chants scared me because I've been in the marches, as you have, of Palestinians and of Muslim groups where they really meant it.
Yeah.
And what intifada was. And on this program, we talked about the need for moral clarity, to call this wasn't pro-Palestinian, these were pro-Hamas and pro-terrorist marches. The question would be this, though, that if these kids are willing to chant intifada, intifada in the pursuit of social justice for some foreign death cult, and I think you rightly label Hamas, is it that far, if they believe that that is the social justice movement of their time, to say, well, intifada against America now?
Oh, no, it's not far at all. In fact, it's absolutely what they call for. The main student protest group at Columbia University, it's made so many headlines again recently because of one of its leaders, calls in its founding statements for the complete destruction of Western civilization. I'll just try that again because it sounds so unbelievable. They call for the complete destruction of Western civilization. There's something you can notice, by the way, with 100% accuracy in this. The students and others who do that, and it's not just campuses, it's not just elite campuses, it's people like the ones who shut down the Grand Central Station in New York recently and burned flags outside of the station in Washington, D.C. the other month. They never fly an American flag. They will fly the Palestinian flag. They'll fly the flag of Hamas or Hezbollah or some other group that they want to sort of cosplay being terrorists with. but they will never fly the American flag. And there's a reason for that. It's the same in every one of these protests, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Britain, Australia. The movements that are supportive of the death cults are always supportive of the intifada against Israel first. But it's never against Israel last. It's a completely clear chain of succession. Israel first because they believe they can destroy Israel because it's relatively small, a country of 9 million people, but always the rest of the West next. That's what makes it a revolutionary movement. That's what makes it a terrorist movement. That's what makes it a movement that is, like so many death cult ideologies across history, a utopian movement that seems to believe it's on the right side of things, but is all the time worshipping, literally worshipping death.
Your book is a phenomenal warning for what things are and the moral clarity that is required. There has been a lack of moral clarity, I think you would agree, on the left about this issue. On this show, unlike many on cable news, we call balls and strikes on both sides. There is a lack of moral clarity on the right when it exists for Ukraine. And it's profoundly scary, I think, to me and to a lot of other people. In the Oval Office today, Donald Trump talking about what concessions he thought Russia would offer by way of peace.
Stopping the war, taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
Help us understand. Lack of moral clarity on the left, lack of profound moral clarity on the right. What is the common theme?
I think one of the common themes is that politics is so much a team sport these days. You know, there are more people on the right, broadly speaking, who support Israel in its fight against Hamas than there are on the left. And now there are more people on the left who support Ukraine in its fight against Russia than there are on the right. And we've seen many people who have basically switched positions depending on whose presidency a war started under or who they can blame for it. I would argue that for many Republican voters, I've said this often, for many Republican voters and people on the right, they've been told this was Biden's war. Now, President Trump, of course, has said that repeatedly said this would not have happened on my watch. He may well be right. It seemed plausible to me that Vladimir Putin would not have dared to invade Ukraine if Donald Trump had been president. But we're here because history happened, and Trump wasn't president at the time. The thing that's interesting to me is the number of people who are on the right, who would normally believe in things like territorial integrity, borders, Russian tanks not rolling over into neighboring countries, who've decided somehow that in this, Ukraine is not the victim, but the aggressor. Not the country that has been suffering the war, but the one that is the cause of the war. This is very, very troubling to some of us, because many of us thought that an obvious lesson that the right in America, as in Europe, would have is, you know, we don't like Russian tanks rolling over neighboring countries' borders. I just think that one of the things that is propelling that movement at the moment is, firstly, that thing of team sports as politics, politics as team sports, but also the movement on the right in America, which was always going to come along after the comparative failures of the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, or at least the quagmires that America and her allies got caught in the post 9/11 period. There was always going to be a backlash to that. And what we see it on the right is what I regard as an anti-American backlash, a belief that America can do no good in the world, that America has not been a force for good in the world, that if America goes anywhere in the world or intervenes,
it takes a Brit to remind us. Yeah, it takes us a Brit to remind us of the good that America can do.
Right.
Douglas, I could do a whole hour with you. You do not disappoint. One of the great thinkers of our time. The book is a must-read on democracies and death cults. Douglas Murray, it's good to see you. Thank you.
Great pleasure to be with you and your viewers.
Yeah, appreciate it, sir.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.